Okay, there you go.
All right, thank you. Good catch. So sing to God, sing praises to his name, lift up a song to him who rides through the deserts. His name is the Lord, exalt before him. So David, who functions throughout the song as the worship leader, calls for praises to be sung to God, who is described as the divine cloud rider. Now, the NET uses actually the phrase cloud rider. Other variations will show up in your versions. They'll use heavens and deserts and steeps and all sorts of things like that. Yeah, same verse. Okay. So in the beginning, in the blessing of Moses, Yahweh is described as he who rides through the sky to help you on the clouds of majesty. So the point is that he is the cloud rider, okay? But there are times when the phraseology will be that he's on the desert ground also, okay? That doesn't negate him from being the cloud rider, okay? He can go wherever he wants, right? It's his earth. Okay, so I want to look at setting the prisoners free. Psalm 68, 5 and 6 is where we're going to get headed to here. It says, Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. God settles the solitary in a home. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a parched land. So David praises God for his goodness to the poor, such as orphans and widows, the lonely, prisoners. The emphasis on deliverance for the poor and the oppressed, orphan, widow, prisoner, is also a theme that ties the psalm to the return of Yeshua. So deliverance for the oppressed is closely tied to the first few verses, which speak of punishment for the wicked and rewards for the righteous. When we survey many of the return of Yeshua texts, it is the poor, the needy, the hated, the outcast, the sick, the lame, the rejected, the persecuted, who are always singled out. The NIV captures this image in verse 6, lead out the prisoners with singing. So again, when the prisoners are released, what emotion are they going through? They're happy. Yeah, okay. Maybe happy would maybe undersell it. They're jubilant, right? They are definitely doing the happy dance, okay? Again, most Christian theologians, commentators make this a very general and spiritual term. And so it becomes about setting us free from our addictions or issues in life, right? But as part of the cycle of chastisements in the covenant, many of the inhabitants of Israel will actually be captured and led away as prisoners of war. I think this is where we finished last week, right? Or yesterday. Okay, so the desert marcher. O God, you went forth before your people when you marched through the wilderness or desert, right? So as Ter says, the two concepts of cloud rider and wilderness rider seem likely to be merged here. As we said earlier, the one who comes on the clouds is on the ground and marching through the desert also. The theme of God marching through the wilderness that appeared in the blessing of Moshe was and is repeated in the Song of Deborah, appears here now a third time. As new bits of revelation emerge with each new desert prophecy, we learn that the great desert marcher is not alone. He is specifically leading his people, a vast throng, toward Jerusalem. There will be earthquakes and rainstorms. So the next portion of the psalm looks strikingly familiar because it's a direct quotation of the Song of Deborah. The earth shook and the heavens also dropped at the presence of God. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. So if we compare that to Judges 5, 4, and 5 now, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, even Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. It's the same, okay? This is maybe first example of plagiarism, yes. So the passage emphasizes natural disturbances when the Lord comes, bringing with an earthquake, referring to that great day when Yah came down upon Mount Sinai. The great orator Charles Spurgeon poetically recalls that hill so lone and high bowed before the manifested God. May the reader's heart adore the God before whom the unconscious earth and sky act as if they recognized their maker and were moved with a tremor of reverence. It's like, in other words, the earth is going, Mufasa, right? As there was an earthquake when Yah came down on Mount Sinai, so will there be a mighty earthquake when Yeshua comes down. As there were storm clouds when Yah came down before, so will the second coming be accompanied with tempestuous storms. Over and over, we continue to see the same themes keep getting repeated. Okay, so I'm going to pause in the action here for a second. So Jeff and I were talking yesterday, and there's a teaching that he was doing that kind of weaves together the Sukkoth and the Jubilee idea and stuff like that. So I'm going to give way to Jeff for a few minutes and let him share, and then we'll come back to 68, 9, and 10. Okay, sir?
Albert brought some up the thing about the clouds, and I was doing a teaching and a study, and there's some interesting correlations between what we're doing now with Sukkoth, with this theme of the end times, and with also Mount Sinai also plays into this. And I could go on and on, so I'm going to keep this very simple. In the Greek, we have a translation of the Torah, it's a Septuagint. And while they're not, you can see a Hebrew word consistently through the Torah, you might see the Septuagint word not necessarily used that way all the time. But it does allow us to go with a Septuagint that has the Strong's numbers. It allows us to trace out some of these other things. There's an interesting thing that happens in Jericho. And when the children of Israel are going into the land of Jericho, it says in Joshua 6, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, it says, we all know this about when they went around the town, they marched in and they marched, 7 priests carried 7 shofars marching around the town. They did it for 6 days, and then the 7th day they took 7 priests and 7 shofars. They marched around the thing 7 times. There's all these 7s in there. The interesting thing is in verse 4, it says, 7 priests shall bear 7 ram's horns before the ark. That word ram's horns in the Hebrew is yovel. And it's used consistently throughout there. Where's the first time it's used? Mount Sinai, 1913 in Exodus. And it says that the Lord's horn was heard. It's the word Yovel. And when we look at this, Israel is going into the land of Israel for the first time after they've, to take the land for their own possession. Nobody has possessed the land of Israel before this time. They are going in for the first time. It is a Yovel year. It is a year of Jubilee. What Yovel is, Jubilee. It's when everything is restored. Those poor people, as you were referring to. So that's the theme of Jubilee. Those that were poor, destitute, lost everything, it's being restored to you. And in a timeline, what's significant about this is we look back and we talk about the 400 years that Israel was in captivity, 420 years, whichever timeline you want to use, from the time that Abraham was promised of them going into the land. So they are at that point, that end point of that promise. What's interesting, if we trace back, and we have to use a couple different books, like Jasher, the book of Jasher for one, we go back and we look at a timeline of not dates necessarily, but time. So lots of people set different dates for when they came out of Egypt, but it's a time frame of, we know it's 40 years from when they came out of Egypt till they went into the land. Whatever date you put to it, it's still 40 years. We can still trace back to the time of Avram, and when he got the promise, when Isaac was born, all these different things. They're time frames. If we go back to when Avram was first told to leave the land, it was Ur of the Chaldeans. It was not Haran, where we see it in Genesis 15:13. But he was in Ur of the Chaldeans. It was 10 Jubilees, 500 years almost to the, as near as we can tell, 500 years to the date, which means it's 10 Jubilees and they're going into the land. What's the significance of 10? In our understanding, 10 is new beginnings. They're starting a new beginning in the Jubilee. It's being restored. The land is being restored to them now. And they are celebrating going in to that land. And we see that with the over and over 5 times the word Jubilee or Yovel in Joshua. Now,
I've got a question. With Yovel and Shofar, are these two different horns?
Okay, remember when, yes, no, they're not two different horns. Okay. Remember when he was talking about Hebrew, that we get the push and the pull, the tug, it's like it's not a clean necessarily. Mm-hmm. It only means this.
Right.
So it's a metaphor. We have a dual reasoning here, just like God's shofar at Mount Sinai was a Yovel. I'm taking you into something new. Okay. It doesn't mean that was the Yovel year, but the principle of Yovel is I'm restoring something you lost. So they went into captivity, and again, the captives, the prisoners, they went into captivity in Egypt. Now he's delivering them. This is the Yovel announcing your deliverance. Okay. The Yovel of going into the land. You have now deliverance. You now have restoration going into the land. So the ram's horn, it's a great question. It's dual purpose, okay. Dual thing that we see in it.
Because you started out talking about shofar and then ram's horn and then Yovel, and so I was
I'm not starting from the very beginning of this. I'm trying to just pick out
from where you started talking. I was just making sure
fine.
It was.
I don't mind questions at all.
3 different kinds of horns for 3 different kinds of things. Okay.
In the Septuagint.
Okay.
Actually goes to the front. He actually goes to the front of the line. Yeah, that's how you earn front of the line privileges, as you ask questions. The Septuagint word for ram's horn in the Greek is salpinx. Okay, it's 45:36. Where is it used? Leviticus 25:11. A jubilee shall follow the 50th year to be unto you. It's the Greek word salpinx. And you can see it used a couple times, but it is referring directly to the year of Jubilee. Now the ram's horn, and further to that, every other place it's used in Exodus, and it's used in Joshua as ram's horns. But in Leviticus, it's specifically used as Yovel. And it's used through 25, 27, and Numbers 34:6 that it's referred to as Yovel. So it's right in the middle, bookended on each end, like the noon, with this shofar. Here's where it's used in Matthew 25, and this is where it ties into what you guys are doing. Matthew 24, I'm going to read 29, 30, and 31. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. You guys have been reading this, right? And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. Guess what word that is? Yovel. Saltings. And they shall be gathered together. What are we doing here? What is the lulav about? The lulav is a picture of the ingathering of all the different types of Yah's people. Sukkoth is an ingathering. And you shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. So for those, and I don't have a problem, whatever people want to do. I do, my wife and I, we do the lulav. In tradition, what the lulav does is we go east, south, east, south, west, north. We shake it to the heavens and we shake it to the earth. Wow, look what Yeshua just said. He shall send his angels with a great sound of a Yovel, an ingathering, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, east, south, west, north, from one end of heaven to the other. Where's the end of heaven? Up. Where's the other end? Down here. So, and then guess where else it shows up? In Revelation. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, 1:10, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet, a Yovel, saltings. So, and you can see that through Revelation 4:1, 8:13, 9:14, and several other places. And, you know, it's interesting. When they went into the land, what did they do the first thing in Jericho? They gathered of the crops of the land. This is a prophecy from Deuteronomy 6:10 and 11. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring you into the land which you swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, to give you great and goodly cities that you did not build, houses full of good things, which you did not fill, cisterns hewn out, which you did not hew, vineyards and olive trees, and you did not plant, and you shall eat and be satisfied. What we do on Sukkoth, we eat and be satisfied. This was their going into the land. You're going to reap all this stuff. And Yeshua said in John 4 that, you know, herein to say one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap, whereupon you bestow no labor. Other men labor, and you entered into their labors. We are to reap of the harvest of the land. There are those that have witnessed to others. We have those that have preached to others, that have fed the widows and the orphans. And there's others that are going to come in and take them to the next stage, take them to the next step. We're going to bring them in. What is one of the things that Sukkoth is known about? Guests, bringing in guests. We're to bring in the widows and the orphans. We're to feed them. We're to help them enjoy the fruits of our Heavenly Father's goodness. So I'm gonna stop there.
Amen. So when so again, I get these people asking questions. Well, how do you figure this stuff out? So here's how you study. You find a word. He found a word. He looked the word up. It's not what he expected. Okay.
How do I look how do I know to look those words up?
Go ahead.
The Spirit. I get promptings all the time. And sometimes he gives me promptings and I don't have an answer. I have to keep digging. And then
So that's excellent. So I'm much simpler. I just use Blue Letter Bible. What's that word? Right? But then it doesn't add up, right? So I run away. That's how you study your Bible. Well, I don't get it. So you run away, right? Yeah, you just give up, right? Because that's how you become a disciple. Okay. No, you don't get it. Now pray, dig, study, claw at it until you can find some sense in it. Okay. Now, here's a really easy way to do this. I pull up Blue Letter Bible, I read a verse. Okay. I look at another translation. It says the same thing. I look at another translation, another translation, another translation. Now all of a sudden I'm seeing it say different things: wilderness, desert, clouds. Well, these guys are idiots. They can't even figure out the difference between a cloud and a desert. Which one is it? Because my Greek mind has to know. I need these things in nice, clean boxes, right? So, welcome. So, when I find that the translators don't agree, that's where I start digging. Because they've all ran into something that they can't express for some reason. So now, I mean, if I could put all of the translators in a room that disagree on this verb, what a great midrash that would be. Okay. We'd have people losing teeth, losing hair, arms cut off. It would be great, right? Oh man. It is too, trumpet. Yeah. This was the same thing when I was at university. When I was at Temple Beth Israel studying with them. And I discovered that the Torah study that they had in the morning was all of the deans of the university. And these guys are like classical Greek professors and stuff like this, you know. And when they had a Bible study, they had a Bible study. They've got Ibn Ezra out, they've got Rambam out. They are ready to have a war over whatever text we were going to be studying that week, right? That was a fulfilling Bible study every weekend, right? Because we would take these words and rip them apart and hash them out until we could get it to make sense, right? Now I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, you know, there was this first century rabbi, I don't remember his name, Shaul or something like that. And he says it meant this. So I'm quoting Romans to him, but they have no clue I'm quoting Romans to him, right? What a great discussion that turned into all of a sudden. Okay. Circumcision of the heart. So it's that process. Again, it's the glory of God to hide a matter. It's the glory of a king to reveal it, unearth it, search it out, claw it out of the dirt. Okay. That's your job as the disciple. Okay. So when you find those, study in multiple versions. And when you find the differences, start your digging process. I guarantee you God will not let you down. Okay. Okay. Continuing on. Thank you for that. 68, 9, and 10, watering the desert now. So the imagery of the dark and gloomy storm clouds of judgment take a more positive turn. You gotta love typing errors. More than simply describing a foreboding storm. David adds some additional detail and he describes the rain clouds as a great blessing here. Verse 9, you gave abundant showers, O God, you refreshed your weary inheritance, your people settled in, and from your bounty, God, you provided for the poor. So recalling Yah's miraculous provision of water for Israel during the Exodus, what happened with the miraculous water at the Exodus? Water from the rock, okay? There was also a parting of the sea. That was a pretty miraculous event. God will again provide for his people by sending rain to the parched desert. In so doing, he will restore his weary covenantal people and display his compassion for the poor. Now, after we get done with Psalm 68, we're going to look at Isaiah the prophet, how he greatly expands upon this theme and describes how when the Messiah comes, the desert will rejoice, blossom, and even become like a lavish forest. It's coming. Remember, it's all about the return, baby. Okay. So as Derek Kinder points out, these verses should also be translated in the future tense. When Jehovah marches forth from Sinai, he will water the deserts. He will revive the heart of his people. Finally, the references to rain falling on dry and parched land may also reflect the timing of this, all specifically taking place during the fall festivals of Israel, when the nation normally awaits the long dry summer season to break with the first rains. Okay. Well, it'd be you're right, the latter rains, yes, are considered the first. Okay, next verses. Kings of the armies flee. Verse 11. The Lord gives the word. The women who announce the news are a great host. The kings of the armies, they flee, they flee. The women at home divide the spoil. So I suggest everybody bone up on your division skills. Okay, so you know how to divide fairly. So the tone of the psalm suddenly shifts to that of a victory celebration here. As in Israel's past, when they were victorious over their enemies, the women would most often lead the celebrations. I would reference Exodus 15, 20, and 21, Judges chapter 5, and Judges chapter 11, 1 Samuel 18, 6 through 7. Those who are, who are these fleeing kings? These are none other than the hostile rulers and commanders who had carried the people of Israel away as captives. So the news to be spread is that the divine warrior triumphs. Hostile kings are defeated, and a great number of messengers spread the news. When we consider that this is ultimately speaking of the return of Yeshua, then the glory of these verses come to life. As Yeshua, the former carpenter or stonemason and rabbi from Nazareth, marches towards Jerusalem, the hostile commanders of the armies aligned with the anti-Messiah are fleeing. How does that make you feel? You just cheer them on, right? Okay, so do we have any, since, other than maybe Andrew and Heather here, so do we have any personal experiences of seeing crowds acting like this? Where? Well, okay, I was thinking more militaristic examples, but they've been to rock camp. That's fine. You ever seen videos of Europe being set free? Yeah. What were they like? When Patton drives the tanks in, he's on a little pony driving in there. Actually, he was on a Jeep, but and what happened when we came into France?
Well, the threw flowers, gave wine,
Right. This is the picture. It's a military battle. The kings are fleeing. Okay, that would be the image of what we're expecting to see here. Get away, get away, get away. Not you. There was a bee. So, okay. No offense. Okay. So, through the sheepfold of Edom, So commentators have struggled with the next few verses, and as a result, they've offered up quite a range of interpretations for this. When we consider the messianic context of the psalm, though, the second coming context, the difficulties seem to quickly dissipate. Speaking of Israel, David describes them as those who lie down among the sheepfolds, verse 13a. So as Yeshua leads his newly delivered people toward Jerusalem, they're described as sheep lying down in their pens, or as my typing mistake said, flying down their pens. I think I was typing this early in the morning today when there was no light.
When sheep fly.
When sheep fly. Certainly this imagery conveys the idea that is with God as the protector, they are completely at ease. The reference to the sheepfold, however, is likely a reference to the actual location through which Yeshua and his people will pass. In other words, it's a clue, but you might have to dig. So as we have seen in the previous sessions, when Yeshua returns, he will pass through the land of Edom. Okay. And tomorrow we'll look at how Isaiah refers to Edom as Bozrah. Bozrah was a fortified city in ancient Edom. Ancient biblical Bozrah correlates with either Petra or another archaeological site about 75 kilometers north, both in modern day Jordan today. Okay. So in Hebrew, the consonants for Bozrah also mean sheepfold. So like a sheep pen designed to keep the sheep in and the predators out, the imposing mountains of Edom created an impenetrable enclosure like a natural fortification. So this verse conveys that within the sheepfold of Edom, like sheep in their pen, Israel will be safe, relaxed, and fully at ease as the chief shepherd leads them home. Remember that in 1 Peter 5:4, that Peter refers to him as the chief shepherd. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. As Fruchtenbaum states, another interpreter, Israel is the flock of God, and this flock is to be gathered in Bozrah. So this idea is very clearly articulated. It is very important, a very important portion of the prophecy of Micah, who is a contemporary of Isaiah. And Micah prophesies in chapter 2, verse 12 and 13, I will surely assemble, O Yaakov, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Bozrah, or in a pen, as the flock in the midst of their fold or pasture. They shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of them. The breaker, or one who breaks open the way, is coming up or advancing before them. They will break out and will pass through the gate and leave by it, and their king shall pass through the gate before them, and the Lord as their leader. Micah 2, 12 and 13. So the Hebrew Masoretic text actually reads, I will make them all like sheep of Bozrah, like a flock inside its pen. So all the critics' themes all the critical themes are here in Micah's prophecy. The Lord promises to gather the remnant of Israel. 2, specifically like sheep in a pen. 3, Yehovah will then go before them. 4, leading them out of the sheep pen. 5, as their glorious king. So when Moshe led the people of Israel towards the regions of Edom, do you remember that story? He requested that they pass through the land. And what happened? They were refused. Numbers 20, 18 to 21. Thus Israel had to go around the perimeter of the Edomite kingdom. You'll find that in Deuteronomy 2:28. So pop quiz. Put your thinkers on here.
Yep.
Do you think that when Yeshua comes back, he will be refused? Yeah. Okay. I don't think he's going to get refused. Okay. Yeshua, the greater Moses, will pass through these regions unchallenged, and rightly so, for he will be traveling upon the king's highway. Numbers 20, 17, and 22.
King's highway, the highway that he makes before him, or what? Or there, or is it just metaphor?
Yeah. So anywhere he walks could be called the king's highway, right? Yeah. And if you have millions of people walking on it, would that not make a big dent in the ground?
Big.
Right? Yeah. Are there already natural roads there for parts of it? Yeah. We tend to put roads at the bases of canyons and things like that. And so I'm sure some of it exists today as natural roads and paths. Does it say King's Highway 101? Probably not yet, you know. So the themes of Israel fleeing to the rugged mountains of Edom and Basra are reflected in Yeshua's sermon on the end times when he warned that when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies or the abomination of desolation is set up on the Temple Mount, then those who are in Judea must flee, right? Okay. Flee where? To the mountains, okay? We find that in Matthew 24:16. We find that in Luke 21:20 and 21. The same idea is conveyed in the book of Revelation, where it states that after the abomination of desolation is set up upon the Temple Mount, many from Israel will flee, quote, into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. Revelation 12:6. So at some point in the future, fair warning, okay? If you find yourself in this situation, you're following this guy in a white robe walking through Edom, do not text me and say, how long are we going to be here? Okay. 1,260 days. Do not ask me. Okay. You already know the answer. Okay. Sidebar to that. When we came up here on day 1, which was a high Sabbath, do you remember that? It's been a couple days. I know we're all wiped out and drunk now, but okay. So day 1, I was driving up here. I looked over here, and low in the sky, what did I see? Smoke. Yeah. The moon. That's correct, Pam. Good job. Okay. It was the moon. What kind of moon did I see?
Pretty darn close to full.
It was a full moon. Okay. Now listen very carefully. Next Sukkoth is going to start on a full moon.
What about the next one?
Full moon. Don't text me when's Sukkoth gonna start. When's it gonna start? On a full moon, right? Now, you're gonna have to wait until the new year to count out 7 full moons. Okay. That's the only thing you need to know is when the new year starts. But Sukkoth is going to start on the full moon. Do I know what day that is on a Greek calendar? I have no clue. You figure it out. Okay. But what I can tell you is that it's going to start on a full moon
Why?
because it's the 15th day of a month.
Right, all right.
It's going to be a full moon. Always. It's just the way it works out. It's always a full moon, the 15th of the month. Does that make sense? Let that sink in. Don't ask me when Sukkoth is next year. This is part of being the disciple. You can now count, okay? You can count full moons. Every month, go outside, look up, see if it's a sliver or a full moon.
If you're passing through a college campus and you see more full moons.
Wrong full moons. This is why context is important, Mr. Andrew. Yes. All right, back on task here. So, the Lord's dove. Next verse. Yet shall ye be as the wings of a dove covered with silver, and her feathers with yellow gold. So the last part of verse 13 has also caused much confusion with a variety of interpreters. So beyond sheep at rest within the pen, now Israel is described as a dove with glittering wings covered with silver and gold. Yet shall ye be as the wings. What's as? Simile. Good. Ninth grade English class again. Okay. A simile. So all of the ADH people do not get to go, we actually get gold and silver. Okay. This is not a literal verse. Okay. It's a simile. So beyond sheep at rest with a pin, Israel is described as the dove with glittering wings. So this is really not that difficult to unpack. In other portions of the Tanakh, Israel is described as the Lord's dove. This is not the only place that Israel's described as a dove. Psalm 74:19, for example, and a silly dove without sense, Hosea 7:11. A few chapters later in Hosea, the exiles of Israel in places like Egypt and Assyria are described returning to Israel like trembling doves. Hosea 11:11. So unlike the previous references, here Israel, the Lord's dove, is now safe and with her king. As such, she is beautified and adorned with gold and silver. You will then, at that point, forever be referred to as the glitterati. All right, Psalm 68:14. Scattering snowflakes. Just watch it. Next, the theme of destroying God's enemies is repeated. The kings of the beast are likened to snowflakes.
Similar.
Just watch it. Watch it. We do not know exactly where this mountain is. The best educated guesses place it in the north, close to Mount Bashan. Some of the peaks there are towers of black volcanic basalt, which generally greatly contrasts with the white snow that falls during the winter months. Yes, they do have skiing and snowboarding available in that area. Because the point of the passage is the Lord destroying his opposition. When the Almighty scattered kings in the land, it was, scattered kings in the land. It was white as snow fallen in Mount Zalman. Willem van Gemmerson, author of the Expositor's Bible Commentary on the Psalms, seems to have correctly captured the intended imagery here of this verse. The corpses of the victims and the weaponry are lying like scattered snowflakes on the mountain. Now, in recent years, the term snowflake has become a popular derogatory term for those who are viewed as being overly sensitive and fragile. Humorously, I think that we have the Lord using the term 3,000 years ahead of time, referring to the dead armies of the anti-Messiah as snowflakes, as snow.
Helping before.
My translation said snowing in Psalm.
Snowing. Yeah. Yeah. Again, so if you went through 15 different translations there, right, you'll get probably 12 different answers as to, what's going on. And again, I think you mentioned this a couple days ago, just to get a trademark copyright on the Bible, it has to be about 40% different than any other translation. So they start messing with verbs and nouns and putting them in different places, and it changes meanings then, right? And it hides things sometimes. So that's why I suggest you use multiple versions and then find a word and dig on it, okay? And parts of speech matter, right? Also, keep in mind that in a Hebraic cosmology, a worldview, the Hebrew language is all about action. It's not, in a Greek worldview, it's all about nouns. Okay. Hebrew is all about the verb. So, we create words in English like Google. So that's a noun, right? But then if I'm working on the internet, I'm Googling, right? We start with nouns in our language and build verbs. Hebrew starts with action and function first and builds nouns from that. Okay. So the very focus of their language is on action and function. Okay. So the part of speech that you're looking at actually does matter. And translations, because of the 40% thing, they tend to fiddle with these things. They'll turn nouns into verbs and verbs into nouns, and it then hides meanings from us. Okay, that's why you always go back to the Hebrew. Yeah. Okay, next up, we're in verse, is it 16, 15, 16? So David next turns his eyes from Mount Zalmon to Bashan. Bashan here seems to be a reference to the mighty 9,200-foot peak today called Mount Hermon, which towers over Israel's northern Golan Heights. Again, this is where you'll find their big ski resort. 9,200 feet, that's a little bit less than the South Sister. This is a climbable, doable thing. Yeah. It's on the Golan Heights, so it's a great strategic viewing point to get a view on the action there, right? Okay, the hill of God is as the hill of Bashan, a high hill as the hill of Bashan. Why leap you high hills? This is the hill which God desires to dwell in. Yea, the Lord will dwell in it forever. Yeah, mountains for them are a little bit smaller than what we think of growing up in the Cascades and the Rockies. Mount Everest, things like that. Those are all much higher than.
That's not Hanoi.
Yeah. So yeah, mountains to them, these are mountains to them. They're big. But like Mount of Olives would be like Mount Pisgah. So you just kind of meander up it, type thing. Okay. So here is another insult dealt to the false gods of the Canaanites and the powers of darkness. The heathen people who had lived in the land looked to the tall mountains in the north as the place where their gods dwelled. As I had mentioned earlier, Mount Zaphon in northern Syria was believed to be the home of Baal. Similarly, Mount Hermon was viewed as the dwelling place of Baal, called Baal Hermon. You find that in Judges 3:3 and 1 Chronicles 5:23. Bashan is also associated in scripture with the Rephaim, the descendants of the giant Nephilim. You see that in Genesis 14:5. But here, the personified majestic peak of Bashan looks enviously at Mount Zion in Jerusalem, a mere hill by comparison. For after marching from Sinai through Edom, Jehovah's final destination is Zion. This is the place where Yah has determined that he will dwell forever. Little Mount Zion, right? So the paradox of choosing Little Mount Zion over the towering Mount Hermon, Mount Harmonies, I have to fix that, is the kind of paradox that God delights in, like the choice of David himself. Remember, there were other brothers that could have been options, right? But he picked little David, okay? To whom this psalm is attributed. And little Bethlehem. Indeed, 1 Corinthians 1:8 says that he likes to choose the things that are not. It's probably why he chose us. We're the things that are not. So these verses are also a devastating blow to most Christian theologians who claim that God no longer has any special plans for the literal Mount Zion or the Jewish people. As this passage makes clear, Mount Zion will be the Lord's perpetual dwelling place. This is the mountain where Yeshua will sit upon the throne of his father David, ruling over the nations. All right, let's pause there. So as we go through the psalm, are you seeing all of these end time events lining up? Okay, it's the same themes being spoken of that we see. Again, as kind of a New Testament believer, we look at the book of Revelation type thing, and we see certain things going on. And yet these are the same things that Psalm 68 is talking about, the Song of Deborah talked about, the blessing of Moses talked about, okay? It's all a consistent set of themes that we're working through. Paul didn't come up with anything new, okay? He's just teaching you Torah, right? It's just that he knew it better than us, okay? And that's what he had been prepared for his whole life, was to be able to do that. He also had 3 years in, Mount Sinai in a cave, probably helped. Most of us haven't went through that experience, one-on-one with God. So again, I just want you to keep, as you read through this psalm, we'll finish the psalm tomorrow. Be pondering on these themes, okay? It's again, everything in Hebrew is about pattern, okay? Themes are about finding patterns, okay? So once you've found a theme to work through, you can just start, as you go through that Torah portions that year, you will find it showing up everywhere. Years ago, we were talking about this earlier. I did a whole year on rabbinics. I did a whole year on ancient Near East archaeology, did a whole year on honor. Each year we would do a different theme and then work through all of those Torah portions, that year, looking for those themes, right? And lo and behold, they were everywhere. Okay, because there just are certain themes in scripture God likes to talk about, right? But if you think that every verse is a different verse and unrelated to all of the other verses, it makes Bible study really difficult. Okay, and it makes theology impossible. But it's the understanding, the comprehending of themes that makes it a lot easier to come up with a consistent understanding of end times events and stuff like that.
And beyond from verse being different, chapter is generally continuous. The chapter breaks are just there because somebody
They're
decided to put it
totally
down there.
random. Totally random.
You can be reading about one thing and it flows into the next chapter, so you have to read back for context.
So in a Hebraic cosmology, they use something called block logic. Okay, your default system growing up in a Greek world is to use chronological logic. Okay, so when we were in, I don't know, 4th grade-ish, 5th grade, somewhere in there, you learned how to make an outline. Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3. Then you had to put in some points to make your point. So you'd have a 1 and then a 2. And then you had, small case I and then small case I and I. That is Greek logic. Okay. That the Greeks think in this linear direction. Okay. Making all their points in a line. Okay. Block logic does not work that way. So let me give you a case in point. You're reading your Torah portion, and it says, I don't know, the topic that we're reading about the Yovel, okay? And it says, in the Jubilee year, blah, 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 and don't kill a kid in its mother's milk, okay? And you go, what does that have to do with anything? That's out of place. Okay, what you just did is you said, my Greek lot does not make sense to my Greek logic. God, your Hebrew logic is wrong. Okay, it does belong there. It's there for a reason. It's there because of block logic, and it's your job to figure out why it's there. So as Paul says, renew your mind, figure out how to think Hebrew, how block logic works, how their cosmology works, and how their language works and stuff like that. And then that verse will make sense. Same thing, you're reading your New Testament, which, whether we got Greek documents or Hebrew documents, really is irrelevant. It was thought in Hebrew, okay? So that means it's based on Hebrew logic, not Greek logic, okay? And you're reading along, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, where did we switch topics? What just happened there? When you run into those moments, that just means you had a Hebrew logic brain fart. Okay, like what topic were we on? It changed somehow. Okay, it didn't change. It only changed in your Greek logic. Okay, so now you have to go back and you have to figure out how it fits in. Now, there is another option that many have chosen. You could just rip those pages out of your Bible and throw them away. Okay. Yeah, or like in Pakistan, what they run into is the missionaries come over and they only give them New Testaments, or they will tell them, rip all of the old pages out of the Old Testament, rip those pages out, and just study the New Testament. Okay, well, you find me anyone on the planet that's reading a novel and would tear out the first half of the book and be happy reading the book. No one in their right mind would do that with a secular book. how much less should you do that with the word of God? You can't have it make sense then, right? But see, in New Testament theologian thinking, you don't, that's all been dealt with and done with, and it's in the past, and it's just history, and you don't need that. So literally, they have them rip it out. And then they hear a guy like me teaching the whole Bible and explaining how both sides work together, and they go, we've never heard this. This is amazing. No, it's not. This is average. Okay, this is just average. So those when those things happen as you're doing your Bible studies, just realize those little hiccups are clues where you should start digging. Okay, when you have those hiccups, dig there. There's something really interesting that you're probably missing or reading over or something like that.
Missler talked about that.
Yeah.
He said, whenever you run into something you don't understand, you write it down in a book and make note of what the date is, what the issue is, and what you don't understand. And you say to the Lord, Lord, I want you to show me what's going on. It says, in some time, it won't be instant, not often as it is. You'll be talking to somebody or you'll be reading someplace else, and all of a sudden that answer will come.
Yep.
And then you need to go back to your book and you need to write down the answer, because when you wrote down the question, you had no clue. And you write down the answer, what the date was, and he said it's up, and that will build a testimony. A book of testimonies of things where God has told you the answer to questions you have, and it's very wise.
Do you remember what story was this? We were at Bill and Jenny's house, and you were like, I've never got that. And it was the story of Jephthah and what happened in Jephthah. And by the next year, when that story came back around, I had the answer for you. And we parsed out all of the words. And when you parse out all of the words in that story and you realize what's going on, it makes much more sense. But the average teaching we get out of that is not a satisfying teaching, right? So I find, again, this is just the way Torah portions work. When you have those questions, whatever's going on that next year is preparing you for that answer the next year. You may not get it right now, but the Torah portion reading and the midrashing that we're going to do is preparing you. So when you get there next year, you will have elevated yourself. Remember, I used to talk about this all the time. The feast days are like a barber pole. Okay. And it goes, the point isn't that it's a cycle and every year we go around the cycle. Merry-go-rounds are boring. Okay. It's that you elevate every year. Okay. And every feast, series of feast states, we're supposed to be elevating as we're going around, and you elevate. Okay. But if we just keep going round and round and round and doing the same thing and saying the same thing, there's no growth. We'd just be a bunch of lost sheep, right? The point is that we're supposed to be going somewhere, right?
What gets me is that everything's about Joseph, and then in the middle of it, it switches to Judah and Tamar. Just switches.
And yet God put it that way for a reason, right? Yeah. So stay tuned.
You know, in looking at this verse that you just read,